So, Louise, welcome to the This Is Canterbury podcast. Thank you very much for coming on. I know it's a very busy time.
Thanks for having me.
Very hectic at the moment, I assume. It's also, was fairly short notice for a lot of people. It was short notice for me. That's why we're in my kitchen as opposed to a studio. So we're, going to make the most of what we've got. It's very trendy now to do it in a podcast in a kitchen, apparently. So I think we're on trend.
It's nice and relaxed. It's lovely.
Yeah, it gives a bit more of a relaxed start. So we're going to talk about you and what makes you tick. We're going to give people a chance to get to know you a little bit. And so let's start by talking about one of the best ways to get to know somebody is to talk about their upbringing, if you like, whether their start in life, where you were born and bred, and how any of that kind of created your core principles for you.
Okay. So, born and bred in Kent. Originally, I'm from Deal. My father's family are from the Midlands, and my dad came down to Deal to join the Royal Marines.
Okay.
So he met my mother, whose family are from Deal, and got married, and the rest, they say, is history. So we lived in Deal on and off for many years when my dad wasn't moving around the country and we wasn't moving with him. But for most of my early childhood was in Deal. And then following my parents' separation, we moved over to Canterbury. That was in 93. So I've lived in Canterbury since February 1993. So I would say that I had very modest upbringing. I'm not from a wealthy background. My family are typically working class. And I would say probably in terms of values, my dad has probably had the most influence on me in terms of service and that service ethos, which is probably why I went into
this, but also sheriff. I've met you a few times as sheriff. You've been a city councillor as well. What was your ward? Sturry ward. So public service. You mentioned that there's a military connection. I read a blog post. I don't use it, but I've got a double-barreled surname that comes from two different parents. I saw you put out a blog post about this. Well, I mean, it's interesting. I find it very. I'm in exactly the same boat. At some point in my life, I just decided to use one name. I can't even remember when I started doing it. So there was some commentary around a double-barreled surname and people thinking you were...
Yeah, there was. It was, I think, sort of when my name came out as the parliamentary candidate, there was this fixation from a few people about my double-barreled surname and the fact that because I have a double-barreled surname, it must mean that I'm wealthy. Mm-hmm. And really all I wanted to do in putting that sort of story out on my website was just to show that actually I have this name for a reason, and I have the name because I want to recognise my father and my husband. And really, for me, it's about remembering my sister, who's no longer here, because that's my connection to her, and my daughters. My daughters were called Quirke. I raised them in my maiden name. So it was having that connection to my family, but also honouring my husband when we got married. So it just seemed like the most obvious thing.
Was there any sort of defensiveness in the accusation you might be posh?
I don't think there's anything wrong with being posh, and it wasn't a defensive thing. It was really more so to get the information, my story, out there, because I felt that people have got the wrong idea of who I am, and this is who I am. And I think I'm quite upfront and quite authentic anyway. And I want people to know me. That's whole part of running for parliamentary candidate, is that people get to know who I am when they go to vote. And that's important. So I want people to know as much as they can about me. That's important.
So if you were to sum up your core values in a couple of words, and also in particular how they reflect your Conservative and how they reflect the Conservative Party's values. What makes you sort of get up in the morning and want to do the job of an MP?
It's, I think, hard work for me. I've always been a grafter. I've never shied away from putting myself forward for anything. And I would say supporting my family. That, you know, when I was a single parent, I was solely responsible for supporting my kids. So for me, it's always been family and working to support my family. And that's what's kept me going all of this time. And although my girls are grown up now, they're in their 20s, you know, you never as a parent sort of get away from feeling responsible, if that's the right thing to say. They'll always be my girls. So, you know, now at the age that I am, I'm only just buying my house because, like I said before, I had very modest upbringings and I'm not wealthy. And it's taken me a long time financially to get into a situation where I can afford my own home. So for me, you know, working and giving myself and my family a better quality of life, fundamentally, that's what keeps me going every day. But in terms of this job being an MP, it's because I have a commitment to serving my residents, and I always have. And for me, that's equally as important as looking after my own family.
You mentioned your family there a lot. You mentioned your girls. You see them a lot on your social media, helping you out with the campaign. What do you think the impact of becoming an MP would be on your life? I mean, so you work full time at the moment?
I'm still working full time.
Still working full time. You mentioned a family. You know, I think there's been lots of talk, especially over the past couple of years, but really into now this election campaign about things like the safety of MPs.
Sure.
What's your take on what might be the impact on you and your family?
So before I put myself forward for this opportunity, I spoke to my family, my husband and my kids, even like my father. We sat down and we had a very frank conversation about what this would mean, and that by raising your head above the parapet, it's going to attract attention, sometimes negative attention. And my girls and my husband, my family have only ever been supportive. I'm very lucky that my husband is a police officer, so I have that support from him in terms of, you know, he's a very strong person, and I always feel very safe in his company. So I'm very lucky that I have him. But in terms of my girls, we've always known as a family what this would mean. I'll be really honest, this election has been fine for me. I haven't actually had any negative kind of attention. There's obviously conversations on the doorstep that don't always go the way you want. But in terms of hostility, there hasn't been any. I've been very, very fortunate so far in this campaign.
That's a credit to Canterbury. I think, there's... I think that there's a lot of toxicity in politics at the moment. We see it, you know, playing out on social media. We're, you know, in Canterbury Residents Group, we're regularly making judgment calls about what is and isn't acceptable in terms of discourse. It's really good to hear that you've had a positive experience in Canterbury. You know, you are running for the governing party, for the current party, who are obviously the ones under the scrutiny, under the criticism at the moment. How do you take the criticism, you know, that you face? You know, when people do call out what they see are, you know, errors of the last government and the government before.
There are areas where people have every right to feel upset. You know, there are, and it would be really foolish of me to try and make excuses for people, because at the end of the day, if something's happened and it's affected somebody in a negative way, the only way to deal with that is to be accountable. It's difficult in the sense for me that I wasn't part of that government. So really, I'm kind of inheriting a legacy, if you see what I mean. All I can do and all I can try to do is say, you're voting for me, you're not voting for those people. I want to be your constituency MP, and these are the values that I have. And for me, that's how I'm trying to handle it at the moment. If somebody has a particular concern, I do my best to try and address that. And absolutely holding people to account. But for me, I'm a new candidate and I very much want to focus on what's in front of us.
quite a few people on the residents group said that they knew you as a councillor and they found you very helpful as a councillor, and that they would support you in being an MP if you were running for a different party. That obviously, must be difficult, but where do your Conservative Party principles come from so strong that you can see somebody say something like that and not even think, oh, maybe I should be with a different party?
Well, we spoke earlier about the double-barrelled surname and the wealth and all of that, and I think there's a misconception that if you are a representative for the Conservative Party, then that means that you must represent wealth. And essentially, my Conservative values are very much that I support strong national defence, and I support low taxes, and I support equality, and I believe in empowering women, and there's a whole host of reasons that make me a Conservative. It doesn't come down to wealth, which is a really common misconception. For me, it's because I want to support people, because I want to look after people, and I want to do my best. And I would say that those are the strong Conservative values that I have. And as a social housing tenant who is buying her home under the right to buy, which was a Conservative policy, I would say that actually that's probably the most Conservative that you're going to get.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Let's talk a bit about Canterbury then.
Go on.
I've said this to every candidate and they've all agreed. So first of all, best city in the world, yes or no?
Yeah.
Right. So Canterbury is a very loved city. The community here is very strong. They're all very passionate about issues in Canterbury. And people in the residents group, one or two asked, what would be your most pressing Canterbury issue if you were elected? What would be your number one thing that you'd get to work on straight away that would tangibly change or affect Canterbury?
When we say Canterbury, are we talking about the constituency?
The constituency, so include Whitstable if you like. So it's difficult, but...
Yeah, I would say there's different issues. I would say when you're looking sort of more coastal, it would 100% be sewage. If you're looking at the rural areas of the constituency, for sure, development. Sort of the more metropolitan area of Canterbury, I would say congestion, parking, homelessness is another one that comes up quite often. But each sort of pocket of the constituency has a sort of a pressing issue. I don't think there's one issue that is affecting everybody. It's sort of whereabouts in the constituency in terms of where that issue is.
Obviously, as an MP, you work with the City Council, the County Council. We're one of these places where there's always different organisations working together, and they can be of different political whole. So obviously, we're Canterbury City Council currently Labour majority, and Kent County Council Conservative. It's what are your feelings on working together with different political parties to make things happen for Canterbury?
Look, some of the best results have been done through working cross parties. I happen to know that in Whitstable there's a cross-party group of county and city councillors that are working to try and find a solution for the SEND school and the situation in Church Street. So, there's advantages to be had for working cross-party. If there are advantages to residents and if there are advantages to communities, why would you not do that? To me, it seems that if it's beneficial to people, then you would do that.
You've been a city councillor, so you've been in. How long were you a councillor for?
4 years.
So you saw firsthand how much influence an MP can have on the council. Obviously, it was a Labour MP, and at the time you were on the council, it was a Conservative council. The Labour MP said sometimes that it was difficult working with a Conservative council.
Okay.
And do you think that that's something that needs to change? Do you think, what would be your thoughts about
that? In the nicest way possible and in the most respectful way possible, as a city councillor, I found it equally difficult to work with the MP. Not because for the lack of trying, there was a breakdown of communication, and there were emails that were left unresponded to. I think it's quite difficult on the whole for an MP to work with the city council of any party, because you don't directly have a say on what happens. You can only sort of put your two pennyworth in it and try and represent your residents as best you can, but you don't make decisions. I think really in working with any organisation, whether that is the city council, county council, it's all about communication, and it's all about getting the message across that this is what's best for the residents. How can we best work together to find a resolution?
We're talking about with different county councils and stuff. Do you think it's a bit of a mess? Do you think that we need to be looking at a different way of doing politics in unitary style, or having these three different bodies, and then you'll have obviously lots of experience with parish councils as well. What about sort of your thoughts on local political reform?
So I was on a parish council. So before I was a city councillor, I was on a parish council for 4 years. I do have experience from that grassroots level. What I found actually the most is that people are unsure who to go to. So, people are unsure if they live in a parish area, they're not aware of what their parish council can do. And, lots of the sort of comments that I see on social media where people are saying, we need to speak to the city council about the roads. And then it's county council. And there's lots of sort of people don't know the right person to go to. So in terms of a unitary, would that be beneficial? I don't know. It's a very hypothetical thing. But for me, as an MP, it would be to ensure that people are signposted to the correct organisation and the correct people that can help them.
Another one that comes up all the time, healthcare, A&Es, Canterbury's A&E. A lot of people wanting to know fairly straightforwardly from each candidate if they support an A&E in Canterbury. Obviously, that's a promise which has been made by Conservatives in the past. Is it something that you could you can promise? If not, why? What sort of just general thoughts on an A&E in the city?
So I spoke about this at Hustings last week. My sister was a nurse in NHS in A&E. And actually, talking to her just last week, she was saying to me, Louise, I spent most of my time checking boxes, and I would spend 5 minutes with a patient. I got into healthcare because I want to spend my time with patients. I think that we need to get rid of the layer of bureaucracy that is preventing people from actually doing what they want to do, which is working in healthcare. I think that there's a layer of management that needs to be addressed. There's wasted resources that needs to be addressed.
Removed? When you said
relocate, let's say it that way, because remove sounds like I'm about to sack loads of people, and that's not what I'm suggesting. But
you think there's a structural issue?
I think there is a huge structural issue in the NHS. I think we need to look at better resourcing, but also in terms of Canterbury, I had my eldest daughter at Kent and Canterbury. My youngest daughter I had at QEQM. And in terms of travelling to the QEQM as a heavily pregnant woman having a child is a horrendous journey. So for me, as a local person, I want services brought back to Canterbury.
So you'd actively campaign for an A in Canterbury. And obviously, that, like I say, is every candidate so far has said, I think, that they'd want to actively campaign for a hospital in Canterbury. What do you say to people that have just lost trust in promises like that? How do you win their trust back?
It's a valid point. You can't, we have had various promises over the years from different people in government, and I'm not going to shy away from that. We have. We were told several years ago that we would have a new hospital as a result of a development, and that's, not come to fruition. For me, the infrastructure is there in Canterbury. It's, that hospital, it belongs to the people of Canterbury. So the infrastructure is there. I just want to bring investment to it and bring those services back. And I do believe that it can be done. And, you know, the Conservatives are looking to invest in hospitals. Why can't Canterbury be one of those? And I think if we make a strong enough argument for it at that parliamentary level, because also remember, the last time I was at City Council level trying to bang the drum for a new hospital, at parliamentary level, it would be that much different. And I think that I would be in a stronger position to have the conversation with those top bosses that, you know, are the ones holding the purse strings.
Another common question is about homelessness and food banks. And there was a question, you know, by Canterbury Food Bank posted on there saying what would asking what candidates think about the increased use in food banks. Is it a problem which is going to go away? Is it something which you think a Conservative government can help make go away?
I think it's a sign of how bad things have been for people. It's, you know, the last few years, the pandemic has hit us really hard, and, you know, we've all gone back to normal. You know, we're sitting here, we're not 2 meters apart, we're not wearing face masks, there's no hand sanitizer. So, you know, how we're living is totally normal. But unfortunately, economically, it hasn't gone back to normal, and it's taking us a long time to recover from the legacy that the pandemic has left. I, as a single parent, as I mentioned before, I nearly lost my home. I was facing eviction, and I can speak from the heart and say, I know how this feels. It's awful. It's terrifying being in a position not to be able to feed your family. It's awful. The way that we go forward, I think, is we look at the fundamental reasons that people are in this issue. Is it financial? Is it breakdown of family? Is it, in one of my cases? Sorry,
what would you say? In your experience?
One of my issues was, as a single parent, I wasn't receiving the support that I needed in terms of maintenance.
Right.
So this is one thing that we need to look at. We need to address non-compliance. Absent parents who are not supporting their children for whatever reason, that needs to stop. We need to, people who are in work, we need to make sure they're keeping the money that they're earning and not paying ridiculous rates of tax. We need to help people get back into the workplace. You know, people, particularly like my daughter, my granddaughter is 2.5 now, and my daughter is looking for work. Being able to provide that childcare to give people that opportunity to go back to work. If I hadn't have gone back to work, I'd be in a very different situation to what I am now. But, you know, I think that the issue with food banks, I think we need to look at the fundamental reasons why people are using them and better support those people.
If you were this is a slight tangent. If you were to become an MP and have what sort of department would you most like to get involved in? What area? You know, I guess especially reflecting on your work as a councillor in terms of where you think the work needs to be done for most people in Canterbury.
I don't really know. I would probably say, with my connection to the university, I would probably say education. So
education is quite a big thing for you?
It is, especially.
What is your livelihood?
I mean, it is my livelihood. Yeah. You know, I work at the university, and you know, I believe that we should be investing in our education, and we should be, you know, supporting, particularly in Canterbury, our universities. You know, they're bringing new talent to Canterbury. And they're giving people the opportunities that they need in life. And that's fantastic, and we should be supporting that. I think I would probably, though, when you say what area would I go into, for me, rather than having a specialty, I want to be a really good constituency MP. And more than anything, that's what I'm striving to achieve. So I'm not really looking at the moment to go into a particular specialty. I just want to give the people of Canterbury what they need. You
mentioned the University of Kent, and we've talked about developers a few times. What's your thoughts on the University of Kent's development plan in Blean, and also just generally the university have had to make a lot of cuts. You know, their financial position that all the universities and many education institutions find themselves in. A lot of them blame Brexit. It's something which happened a long time ago, but still regularly comes up in Canterbury Residents Group. It's still something people talk about all the time. Just briefly, what's your position on allowing the University of Kent to develop in Blean, and how do you think that reflects on your views on the wider picture about funding for institutions of education?
It's a very difficult one to answer because obviously I work at Christchurch. In terms of the development, I don't support the development in Blean. I think it's very unfortunate that the University of Kent have found themselves in the position that they have, for whatever reason that is, and I'm not an expert on UKC finances. The solution and how they get themselves out of it, I don't know. But in terms of building up Blean and, putting the people in those communities and their lives and how, those communities at risk, I don't feel that that's right. Building on agricultural land, I don't feel that that's right either. So in terms of what the solution is for them, I don't know. I'd be happy to sit down and have a conversation with them. But for me, the development is a huge no-no. For me, it's not sustainable. It's going to impact on Canterbury in terms of congestion. The infrastructure is not there. It's just, for me, it's one problem after another, knocking a school down. It's just not right for Canterbury.
So how can we revive the falling admissions, especially from Europe?
Yeah, well, I obviously know from working at Christchurch that our international students' numbers have dropped. And, when we look at policies that we've brought in, we need to be very careful because obviously we need to be careful not to encourage, how do I say this in the right way without sounding really offensive? We never can encourage any kind of migration through the back door. But at the same time, we cannot let that impact on our international students. And there has been a significant drop in international students that are coming over. And I know this from the university, and I also know that this is the same for the University of Kent. We need to be careful that we are still attracting people from abroad, international students coming over, because with them brings a wealth of talent that we need in Canterbury. And it's talent that we're missing out on. So we need to make it possible for them to be coming to Canterbury. How that looks in the future, I'd be happy to sit down and have those conversations. But we need to be very careful in making these policies that in the long term we're not shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, I mean, for example, allowing international students to bring dependents is something which is, being stopped in the Conservative manifesto. Yeah. What do you think? That's going to make things worse, isn't it?
I worry about that policy and how it's going to affect us long term. Like I said before, we can't allow migration through the back door, and we do have to be very, very careful. But at the same time, we need to look at the people who are coming here to study and how we retain them, because that's what it is. It's the retention, and we want people to be working in our healthcare, and we want people to be investing in our local economies. So we need to be very, very careful that we are not shooting ourselves in the foot with this one. But yeah, I mean,
so you fight for Canterbury's interest there,
absolutely, and so the universities as institutions. Yeah.
How would you feel about we have a political system which means that MPs often complain that they can't vote freely. Some of them. What's your view on things like whip votes? Because it seems that Canterbury is a really interesting constituency. It's very different. It's very varied. You may sometimes be asked to vote for something which is, damaging to something in Canterbury. Yeah. Would you be able to do that? How would you feel about whipped votes?
I was asked to vote for something when I was a councillor that I was absolutely against. And I spoke to the leader at the time. We had lots of conversations in group. And I said, I don't feel comfortable voting for this. It's against everything that I stand for. And I was given a free vote. And you are given a free vote in Parliament. And I think that if you make the case for it, if it is something that you feel passionately about, and if you say this negatively impacts my constituents and I just cannot support this. You know, I know that MPs have done that, so I know that it can be done. If it was an issue that was going to negatively impact the residents in my constituency, then I would do everything that I could to represent my constituents. Absolutely.
How do you feel about Labour's proposal to tax private school fees? We've got a big private school in Canterbury, one of the most famous in the world, King's School. Lots of private schools around the city. What do you think about those proposals, and what would you say to people who are asking questions about them?
So there was a very interesting question about that on the television the other day, and there was somebody that said, you know, with this, you're just forcing us to put our children into mainstream schools. I'll be honest with you, I'm not an expert on this at all, and I'm not going to try and be an expert because that would be disingenuous of me. In terms of our schools in Canterbury, we need to be looking at ways to be supporting them, not punishing them through tax. I don't believe in taxing, certainly when it comes to education. So these are conversations that I need to take away. And actually, you're not the first person to ask me. These are conversations that I need to take away and I need to be having with members of the party and find how we can find a solution for this.
Do you consider yourself an environmentalist? There's, you know, Canterbury, beautiful green spaces all over, a wonderful river running through it. And on social media, every weekend, every day sometimes, you see pictures of people having to get togged up in waders and whatever, and they go and they litter pick and they river trawl. Do you think it's right? I mean, we can celebrate the fact that we've got a community that steps up like this, but do you think it's right that if it's falling to volunteers to essentially maintain the Garden of England?
We should be supporting our local authorities to ensure that they can better enforce areas. As a city councillor, I know that one of the areas that we struggled with was enforcement. And, you know, as councillors, we were always fighting and saying, look, we need to get enforcement out here, we need to get enforcement out there.
This is fly tipping, basically. Fly
tipping, littering, you know, it's a really difficult conversation to have because as a former councillor, it's something that I championed. You know, I really struggled to get enforcement out into the rural areas because, again, the misconception is, well, it's only the cities that it matters. So I think as a government, we should be ensuring that local authorities are resourced to be able to deal with this. But you're right, it shouldn't be down to volunteers. Personally, I like a good litter pick, and I've been known to go out litter picking, and my daughters, like you mentioned before, my daughters come along with me, and it is brilliant to take pride in where you live. It absolutely is, but it shouldn't be their responsibility to do that.
You know, local authorities being able to do more means more budgets. I mean, when you were a councillor, were you frustrated that the budgets that you had, you know, you weren't able to make things stretch as far as you needed to, and you know, did that frustrate you?
I don't necessarily think it's always a budgetary issue. It's how you spend those resources and what you spend them on. And as a Conservative administration, we were always focused on services rather than, you know, providing big, wonderful, you know, colourful things. It was always services, bin services. And it, for us as the Conservative administration, that was what we tried to achieve. So budget, but council tax budgets aren't something which you have a huge concern about. Absolutely.
So not council tax budgets, council budgets.
Well, you mentioned council tax, but, you know, the interesting thing with that is potentially with a Labour government, council taxes will be going up. So, but, you know, when we look at councils, it's really difficult. We saw sort of last year with the parking increases that went up, there was huge outroar. The new administration are trying to deliver certain initiatives. They've brought back the Park and Ride, but with bringing back the Park and Ride, it was nearly a £300,000 price tag. So it's how you cut the budget that you have without trying to punish the people that live in that area. and it is difficult.
Let's talk a little bit about national issues. I want you to imagine you're walking in your first day in Parliament and you're about to make your maiden speech. What would be your first priority, your first thing you'd raise in a speech in Parliament? Was something whether I think maybe that could be something that's particularly close to your heart, or maybe something you feel is particularly pressing?
For me, locally, I want to champion equality here in Canterbury. That's something that's incredibly close to my heart. It's part of the fabric of everything that I do as a staff member at Christchurch. For me, I want to be an MP that is proud to bring equity to Canterbury and to Whitstable and the villages. So while I haven't actually thought as far ahead as my maiden speech, but for me as an MP, I want to focus very much on equality and fairness.
Well, and what does that look like to you? I mean, obviously, you mentioned you were involved in a Women in Parliament scheme of some kind, I think, or I saw something on social media, right? You visited events, Conservative women events and stuff. Is that an important topic to you?
So I was asked to nominate a woman in the constituency who had been inspirational to me. And I'm friends with several women who are inspirational to me. And actually, there was a couple of my friends that I wanted to take, but one of them was working, one of which is a paramedic. And she worked throughout COVID, throughout lockdown. And she's a fantastic woman, but unfortunately, due to work, she couldn't make it. The other lady that I took with me, Millie is a pharmacist, and she has been championing the Pharmacy First. Again, she was one of the ones working as a key worker through COVID, and she was going into homes, doing her clinics that she does in terms of, and also getting the vaccine out. So she was one of the ones responsible for getting the vaccine out, and then the flu vaccine after that. So to me, being able to take her to number 10 and recognising the work that she's done for the people in Canterbury and how inspirational she is, absolutely. As women, we empower. We lift each other up, and it is about empowering each other.
Do you think women's rights are under attack?
To a degree, I do think that women's rights are under attack. But when we talk about women's rights, I think it's also important to recognise trans rights as well. And at the moment, the conversation I feel that's being had is it's very much an us against them kind of feeling. That's the kind of feeling that I have when we have this discussion. And I'm a woman, I'm a mother of two girls, I'm a grandmother to a young 2.5-year-old granddaughter. Their safety is paramount to me, 100%. The safety of women and girls, I think everybody agrees that that's important. But when we have that conversation, the way that conversation is coming across is it's coming across in a very diversive kind of way.
Toxic debate
we need to be having these conversations in a more equitable way.
You went to Pride Canterbury this year.
Yes,
I saw the pictures. You're a big supporter of the LGBTQ community. What do you think of the fact that the incumbent MPs, there was a protest at her launch? Now, we haven't seen, things like protests at MP election launches in Canterbury, certainly in as long as I know. Do you think this? What do you make of all this?
I think that it's a sign of the times and a sign of the very controversial views that she's had. We must remember that people have every right to protest, and as far as I know, it was a very peaceful protest. There wasn't hostility or trouble. I mean, I wasn't there, but what I've read in the media is that, it was very restrained, very controlled. And there were people there who wanted to argue for what they felt was right. And they wanted to argue for themselves and for the people they love. They're just trying to be their most authentic self, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with people trying to be that.
Do you find yourself ever at odds with other people in the Conservative Party? I mean, I can think of certain MPs and people in the party who will, I think, hold very different views to you on things like trans rights. Do you find that square hard to circle or whatever?
I think the thing with any political party, you're going to have a mixture of people with very differing views. I think that's just going to be natural, whatever political party that you're in. For me, it's, I've always voiced my views. I'm not afraid to do so. I'm not shy in speaking about how I feel, particularly when it comes to supporting the LGBT community. I mean, how can anybody that lives in Canterbury not support the LGBT community? We've got one of the biggest prides in Kent, and it's something to be proud of. So for me, there are people within the party that are not as liberal and, modern in their way of thinking. That's fine. It's each to their own. I think it's how you come forward and represent the areas and the people in your constituency. If you've got those personal views, I think that's one thing. But when you come forward to represent your communities, it's how you do that and how best you do that, I think, for the benefit of them.
How do you find you're one of the younger Conservatives that I've interviewed and Do you find yourself often being the youngest person in a room or in a group, and you're one of the youngest Conservative candidates?
I don't know. Am I one of the youngest?
I think so.
Wow.
One of, yeah.
It's nice to be one of the youngest.
There's probably some 18-year-olds who make us all terribly jealous of what they're doing at 18. But yeah,
I know. I think, yes, in some cases I have very different views to some who are more traditional, who have been around longer than I have and have, different ways of looking at the world. There's nothing wrong with that at all. There's nothing wrong with that. But, I have two daughters in their 20s who, keep me relatively young as you can be at 45. So, I think that I've been very, very lucky that I've had them in my life, and we can talk about a number of issues that matter to young people. So,
going to go off on a different line of conversation. We're going to do. We've got not too long left, so I'm going to ask some really big questions about really big topics, and ask you for concise answers, which I know is sometimes difficult. But we've had questions about global situations like the conflict in Palestine, between Palestine and Israel. What's your views on that?
I'm not an expert on the Middle East at all. And much like my answer before, to try and make an answer would be disingenuous. But what we need to strive for is the release of hostages. At the end of the day, they've been held for 8 months now. So we need to be striving for a ceasefire and release of hostages.
The police in Canterbury comes up all the time on residents' groups. It's a national issue. The police say that they've been underfunded for a very long time, and for a very long time we've had a Conservative government. What are your views on the police funding? How can we fund the police more? What needs to happen? Where's the money going to come from?
Police, particularly in Canterbury, and this is something that I've spoken to Matthew Scott about, and obviously having a police officer husband, it's obviously something that I feel very passionately about, supporting the police. But in Canterbury, what I would like to see is more community policing. I've spoken very openly before about when I was younger and we all knew who our local Bobby was. And I think that that's what we've been missing, particularly in rural communities in the constituency. So I want to support Matthew. He's striving to bring funding into Kent Police. He's striving to deliver community policing. And as an MP, I would absolutely support him with that. I think that in terms of some antisocial behaviour, having somebody working in a dedicated officer working in the community, I think would be valuable. But more than anything, one of the issues, and I know that we're short of time, so I'll try and be quick. One of the issues that I had as a city councillor was trying to encourage people to report crimes. And without that data, trying to get police resources in that area is really, really tough. So I would really say to people, please report any incident that you think, please get and report it so we have that data.
Finally, is there anything in the manifesto, the Conservative manifesto, that you disagree with?
I wouldn't say necessarily disagree with, but the changes to the Equality Act to do with biological sex. Biological sex is fact. It is fact. It's biology. We can't get away from that. But I want to make sure that we are using inclusive language and we're not causing more division that is already there. So I don't disagree. For me, it's tweaking it and making it more equitable and more inclusive.
That's our 45 minutes. So thank you very much for your time. Louise is standing for the Conservative Party in Canterbury. Also standing is Rosie Duffield for the Labour Party, Russ Timpson for the Liberal Democrats, Henry Stanton for the Green Party, Bridget Porter, Reform UK, and Luke Buchanan-Hodgman for the SDP. But Louise, that was very nice talking to you. Good luck with the rest of the campaign.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. Nice to see you.